In January of 1945, the winter cold had settled heavily over the forests and fields of the Alsace region in eastern France. Snow covered the ground in thick layers, turning the landscape into a silent white expanse that hid the scars of months of brutal combat. Beneath the snow were the marks of war, deep craters left by artillery shells, shattered trees ripped apart by explosions, abandoned helmets and broken weapons scattered across frozen fields, and the remains of vehicles destroyed in earlier battles. The air itself felt heavy, carrying the distant rumble of artillery and the occasional echo of gunfire. By that point, the World War II had already lasted more than 5 long and devastating years. Across Europe, entire cities had been reduced to rubble. Once busy streets had turned into ruins, and millions of soldiers and civilians had lost their lives. Even though many believed the war was approaching its final chapter, the fighting remained just as fierce and unforgiving as it had been in the beginning. On that freezing January day, soldiers of the Wehrmacht launched a determined counterattack against positions held by the United States Army. German tanks slowly rolled forward through the snow, their heavy tracks grinding against frozen earth while engines roared through the cold air. Behind them, infantry soldiers advanced carefully, moving between ruined farmhouses, broken fences, and shell craters as they tried to avoid enemy fire. Each soldier carried the weight of the war on his shoulders, knowing that every battle could be his last. Their mission was clear: break through the American defensive line and push the Allied forces back. Among the American soldiers defending that position was a young commander who looked almost too young to be on such a battlefield. He was small in stature, thin, and barely 19 years old. His uniform was worn from months of fighting, and his face still carried the youth of someone who had grown up far from the horrors of war. Yet this young soldier carried the responsibility of leadership in one of the most dangerous places on earth. His name was Audie Murphy. Within minutes of the German assault beginning, the quiet winter landscape erupted into chaos. Machine guns roared from both sides, sending streams of bullets slicing through the cold air. Artillery shells exploded across the frozen ground, throwing snow, dirt, and debris high into the sky. Soldiers shouted orders, ducked behind whatever cover they could find, and returned fire toward the advancing enemy. The battlefield became a storm of sound and movement, where every second mattered, and every decision could mean life or death. Murphy quickly realized that the situation was becoming desperate. The German force attacking them was larger, better equipped, and supported by armored vehicles. Their tanks provided powerful fire support, while infantry moved closer with every passing minute. The American position was in danger of being completely overrun. If the German attack succeeded, it could break through the line and create a dangerous opening in the Allied front. Recognizing the danger to his men, Murphy made a difficult but necessary decision. He ordered his soldiers to fall back to a safer defensive line further away from the advancing enemy. It was the only way to prevent unnecessary casualties and give them a chance to regroup. But while his men retreated through the snow and smoke of battle, Murphy himself remained behind. He stayed alone at the front line, wounded and facing a much larger enemy force. At that moment, he was not thinking about medals, fame, or recognition. His only goal was to delay the enemy long enough for his fellow soldiers to escape safely and reorganize their defense. What happened during the next hour would become one of the most extraordinary acts of courage recorded during the war, transforming that quiet young man from Texas into one of the greatest military heroes in the history of the United States. But long before that moment in the snow-covered forests of France, Audie Murphy's life had been very different. He was born on June 20, 1925, in the rural countryside of the state of Texas. Life in that region during the early 20th century was often difficult, especially for large families struggling to survive on limited income. The Murphy family lived in modest homes, surrounded by fields and forests, where hard work was a daily necessity. Audie was one of 12 children, and from a very early age, he understood that survival required effort from everyone in the household. His parents worked as farmers and laborers, often moving from place to place in search of stable work. Opportunities were limited, and poverty was a constant presence in their lives. Some days, there was enough food on the table, but other days, the family had to stretch whatever little they had. The children grew up quickly in such an environment, learning responsibility long before most others their age. When Murphy was still young, his father abandoned the family. The departure left a deep impact on the household. Suddenly, the burden of caring for the children fell entirely on their mother. The older siblings had to step up and help keep the family together. For Audie, childhood ended sooner than expected. Murphy left school at a young age so he could work and help provide for his family. Education had to take a back seat to survival. He accepted any job he could find harvesting crops in nearby fields, performing manual labor, helping with farm work, or doing odd jobs for local farmers. The pay was small, but every dollar helped the family get through another day. Despite the hardship, those years also shaped Murphy's character. He developed a strong sense of responsibility and resilience. Life was difficult, but he learned not to complain. Instead, he focused on doing whatever was necessary to support those around him. One skill would prove especially important during those years. Audie Murphy became an excellent hunter. Armed with a simple rifle, he spent countless hours walking through the fields and forests of Texas, searching for small game such as rabbits and squirrels. Hunting was not a sport for him, it was a way to help feed his family. Every successful hunt meant food on the table that night. Hunting required patience and discipline. Murphy learned to move silently through the woods, to observe animal tracks, to wait for the perfect moment before taking a shot. His aim became steady and reliable. Even as a teenager, he developed a reputation among those who knew him as a remarkably skilled marksman. Without realizing it, Murphy was developing abilities that would one day help him survive on the battlefield. The same patience and calm focus he used while hunting would later help him remain steady under enemy fire. But at the time, he was simply a young boy doing everything he could to help his family survive. Everything changed on December 7, 1941. On that morning, aircraft from the Navy of Japan launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor. The event, now remembered as the attack on Pearl Harbor, shocked the nation. Battleships were destroyed, airfields were devastated, and more than 2,400 American servicemen and civilians were killed in a matter of hours. News of the attack spread rapidly across the United States. Radios broadcast updates throughout the day, and newspapers printed special editions describing the devastating strike. Across the country, people gathered around radios and newsstands trying to understand what had happened. The following day, the United States officially entered the World War II. For millions of Americans, the war was no longer a distant conflict happening overseas. It had become a national mission. Young men across the country volunteered to serve in the armed forces. Audie Murphy was one of them. He wanted to defend his country and do his part in the war effort. For Murphy, the decision was not complicated. Like many young Americans of his generation, he felt a strong sense of duty. However, joining the military was not easy for him. Murphy was small and underweight, standing about 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing little more than 110 pounds. Because of his size and young age, several branches of the armed forces initially rejected his application. Recruiters doubted whether someone so small could endure the physical demands of military service. But Murphy refused to give up. Determined to enlist, he kept trying until he finally found a way. With the help of his sister, who altered his birth certificate so he could meet the minimum age requirement, Murphy was eventually accepted into the military. In 1942, at just 17 years old, he joined the United States Army. Like thousands of other young Americans, he was about to leave his home behind and travel across the ocean to fight in one of the largest wars in human history. The journey that began with a poor boy from Texas was about to lead him into battles that would change his life forever. Murphy first experienced combat during the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943. This operation was part of a larger effort to weaken the military power of Nazi Germany and open the path for the liberation of Europe. For Murphy, the battlefield was unlike anything he had experienced before. Explosions echoed constantly, bullets snapped through the air, and confusion filled every moment of combat. War was terrifying and unpredictable. Yet even in these chaotic conditions, Murphy began to distinguish himself. He frequently volunteered for dangerous missions and demonstrated a willingness to move forward under enemy fire when others might hesitate. His fellow soldiers began to trust his judgment and courage. As the months passed, Murphy continued fighting in multiple campaigns throughout Europe. He participated in operations in Italy and later in France. With each battle, his reputation grew. Officers recognized his bravery, and he began receiving promotions as well as several military decorations for his actions in combat. Despite the recognition, Murphy remained a young soldier facing the same dangers as everyone else around him. The war was relentless, and every day brought new challenges. Still, the moment that would define his place in history had not yet arrived. In 1944, Allied forces launched one of the most significant military operations of the war, the Normandy landings. Troops from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and other Allied nations stormed the beaches of northern France in a massive effort to liberate Western Europe from Nazi control. The fighting that followed was intense and costly. German forces resisted fiercely, defending towns, forests, and strategic positions. Murphy continued to serve on the front lines during this difficult campaign. Time and again, he placed himself in danger to protect his fellow soldiers. On several occasions, he advanced under enemy fire to eliminate German machine gun positions or assist wounded comrades. His courage saved lives and strengthened the morale of the soldiers fighting beside him. Then came January 26, 1945, near the small village of Holzwihr. The winter weather was bitterly cold, and the ground was covered in snow. Murphy's unit suddenly faced a powerful German counterattack. Enemy infantry advanced toward their position while tanks provided heavy support. Murphy was responsible for commanding a small group of American soldiers defending the area. As the attack intensified, it became clear that their position could not hold against the overwhelming force approaching them. Murphy ordered his men to retreat to a safer location. But instead of leaving with them, he remained behind to cover their withdrawal. During the battle, an American tank destroyer nearby was hit by enemy fire and burst into flames. Smoke and fire rose from the damaged vehicle. Despite the extreme danger, Murphy ran toward it. Climbing onto the burning vehicle, he reached the mounted .50 caliber machine gun and began firing at the advancing German soldiers. Even though he had been wounded in the leg, Murphy continued fighting. From his exposed position on top of the burning vehicle, he fired repeatedly, while also using a field radio to direct American artillery fire against the enemy. For nearly an hour, he held his position alone. The unexpected resistance slowed the German advance and created confusion among the attacking troops. Eventually, as his ammunition ran low, Murphy withdrew from the vehicle and returned to his soldiers. Despite his injury, he then led them in a counterattack that successfully forced the German troops to retreat. His extraordinary courage during that battle did not go unnoticed. For his actions that day, Murphy received the Medal of Honor, the highest military award presented by the United States for acts of valor in combat. By the end of the war, Murphy had received 33 military decorations from the United States and its allied nations. He became the most decorated American combat soldier of the World War II. When he returned home, he was celebrated as a national hero. Yet, like many veterans, Murphy carried the psychological scars of war. He suffered from nightmares, insomnia, and anxiety symptoms that today are recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Unlike many veterans of that era, Murphy spoke openly about the emotional struggles soldiers faced after returning from combat. In doing so, he helped bring attention to the challenges experienced by many who had served. After the war, Murphy began a new chapter of his life in Hollywood. He appeared in numerous films, often portraying soldiers and characters connected to military stories. One of his most famous roles came in the film To Hell and Back, which was based on his own wartime experiences and autobiography. The movie became one of the most successful war films of its time and introduced millions of viewers to his remarkable story. Audie Murphy's life ended tragically in 1971 when he died in a plane crash in the state of Virginia. He was only 45 years old. Despite his early death, his legacy continues to endure. The young boy who once hunted rabbits in the fields of Texas to feed his family became one of the most respected soldiers in American history. His story represents courage, sacrifice, and the willingness of ordinary individuals to rise to extraordinary challenges when their nation calls upon them.